recording, Ashlee McKeon. She is a PhD and prepared sleep scientist who was initially working at Walter Reed, commissioned into the Army about 4 years ago now, is now a captain, and has since moved down to the U.S. Army Special Operations Command down here at Fort Bragg, right down the street from where I have the privilege of working. I just met Ashlee maybe a few weeks ago, Ashlee. She is extraordinarily impressive. I should also mention that she is not only PhD, but postdoc prepared sleep scientist. So she really knows her stuff. She is also a pretty phenomenal CrossFit athlete in her own right. She is competitive. So she not only, understands what military folks are going through, but she understands it not only from the science part, but from the experiential part, right? She drives her body very hard. And so she understands what it takes and what is required to restore her body. And so part of this restoration part of Fit for Practice is obviously the need to sleep. I am very much looking forward to hearing what Ashlee has to say. I think all of you will find this not only informative, but maybe even a little bit eye-opening to some of our own practices, right? I promise you this will be more than just telling you to turn your computer off before you go to sleep. What I would ask, we have 2 planned breaks during this presentation. One's about midway through. So if you have a burning question, I would ask you raise your hand, and I'll just interrupt Ashlee. If not, go ahead and put the questions in the chat, and then during that break time, we'll go ahead and get to those questions. So without further ado, Dr. Ashlee McKeon, thank you.
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate the intro. Hi, everyone. So I won't spend too much time doing an introduction. Darren already did a short and sweet. So I just want to first say very much so how excited I am to be able to chat with you guys tonight. As an officer in the United States Army, I absolutely love what I do. I love serving my country, but one of the things I truly love to do the most is educate. So it's really nice when I get to do things that are a little more informal like this, and I just get to share knowledge with people, especially people that are also serving in their own communities as well. So I get to share knowledge, and not so much just share knowledge, but I really hope what you're able to take away tonight is the science behind the kind of why we sleep, what happens when we don't sleep well, within the frame of being a provider, but some actual like tangible strategies that you're able to take, harness, and implement in your own lives. That way you're not only the best version of yourself in terms of how you're sleeping, caring for your body, but then you can be the best version of yourself for the clients that you care for, your loved ones. So I really hope that you'll be able to take away those knowledge nuggets and some strategies as well. I find that in the past, a lot of the times when I hear presentations on sleep, it's a lot of facts and statistics. And of course, we'll do some of that. But I'm always wanting to get to the point where someone tells me, well, what do I do about it? This is great. What do I do about it? So I hope we'll be successful at that second piece today, the what do I do about it, the so what. So I'm going to pull my slides up here. Actually, I'm going to have to go back and share my screen with you real quick. Let's see. And then we'll just, we'll get rolling then. Okay, can I just have a confirmation? Can everyone see my slides? Darren, can you confirm, please?
You are good to go, Ashlee.
All right, everyone, we're gonna roll right into this then. Be respectful of everyone's time. So we're gonna really do this in 3 parts today. The first part, we're gonna talk about the science, and I'm gonna try and lay that foundation and give you enough knowledge to be dangerous about good and bad sleep. That way we can roll into part 2, which is focused on strategies. And you'll be able to really, I think, understand better the why and the how behind the strategies if I lay that scientific foundation for you first. And then at the end, we will do some Q&A. And then as Darren mentioned, there's actually going to be another break for questions in between part 1 and part 2. So nerd stuff. Of course, we always start with some statistics, and I wanted to make sure that I pulled some statistics that were as relevant as possible to the realm of being a provider. We're nearing about 50% of healthcare providers who sleep less than 7 hours a night. The National Science Foundation recommends that you sleep between 7 to 9 hours to function your best. So when you think about 50% of our providers not even getting that minimum threshold, that really is something to pay attention to. And that obviously comes with costs, right? So you see these numbers here about how many days of lost productivity we experience annually in the US and what that actually translates to in terms of cost. We certainly know from a very robust sleep literature that just poor sleep, and when I say poor sleep, I mean two sides of a coin. Poor sleep in terms of sleep duration, how long are you sleeping and is it enough? And poor sleep in terms of what we call sleep quality or sleep efficiency. And that's exactly kind of what it sounds like, is how efficient is your sleep? Are you falling asleep and waking up a bunch in the middle of the night? Or are you falling asleep pretty steadily throughout the night? And we know that poor sleep, those two sides of the coin, is a strong and independent risk factor for cognitive decline and early mortality. I always say that, or I always share the story about a mentor of mine in college. She told me that she would teach that sleep is related to all things bad. She would say death, disease, and disability. And I know that sounds like a very doom and gloom story, but it really truly is true when you look at the science that sleep serves as this profound risk factor for things like, metabolic and cardiovascular diseases down the road, diabetes, and even, yes, early mortality. I know that sounds probably very scary, but I think the good thing is with such a robust science, yes, we do know that bad sleep is related to all things bad, but good sleep is also related to all things good and is also preventative for those all things bad. So we certainly can turn it around with the right strategies. And it's not just chronic insufficient sleep or poor sleep that's the problem. It's acute insufficient sleep. So you can see here that just after one night of not sleeping enough or sleeping well, your cognitive performance can go down almost a quarter. And that's just after one night. So, when you think about your own lives and how often you have these probably scattered individual nights of insufficient sleep, that's what's happening to you the next day after just, one crummy night. What I really think is important is these bottom two bullets here. When I was digging into the literature, that you see 97% greater odds of clinically significant treatment errors under sleep loss. Now I would have to break that down much more to other groups, but I'm pretty sure a group as intelligent as you guys who are practitioners understand exactly what this means. It's not just something that's statistically significant. We're seeing clinically meaningful treatment errors happening on the job under sleep loss. And you can obviously imagine the cascading effect that something like that does, not only for the care that's being provided, the functioning of the practitioner or the provider, but also the course of treatment and restoration and recovery for those that you serve when those errors are happening. And then we've also seen studies that have showed sleep loss is associated with lower safety and care quality ratings. So just kind of looking at that bigger picture of who we are to these individuals and what kind of quality of care we're providing. And I think sleep loss gets left out of that conversation a lot, and it absolutely shouldn't, I would argue.
Yeah, Ashlee,
So
because we talked that
sure.
I would jump in on that. Just what I want folks to think about here with that consequence of decreased sleep is basically as we progress into a direct access environment where we're going to have to be able to be on our game and pick up when something is presenting that may look like or even have a musculoskeletal component, but is also presenting as something that may be a more sinister disease process. If we are not sleeping and we're not on our game, what we have to be careful of is going back to that de facto comfort level where we're using kind of automatic thought and we're not thinking on that deeper cognitive level. We lose, as Ashlee just said, we lose our ability to do that as practitioners if we're not sleeping. So I just wanted to throw that out there, particularly as we advance this profession into the direct access environment. Thank you, Ashlee.
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate that comment. So we'll move in and talk a little bit about sleep cycles, right? Because it's important to know what our brain and our body are actually doing when we are asleep at night. You may have seen one of these funny graphs before. They're called hypnograms. And full disclosure, you could honestly spend 2 hours talking about this graph, but I'm going to give you kind of the 2-ish minute spiel about it just for that broad understanding. So just to orient you to the graph, right, on that x-axis, we're looking at number of hours of sleep. And on that y-axis, we're looking categorically at different stages, going all the way from wakefulness into our deeper stages of sleep. And what we're showing here is we're showing both kinds of sleep. So one sleep cycle, you've probably heard, is about 90 minutes long. And that is absolutely true. Give or take a few minutes here and there for each person. And we go through about 5 to 6 cycles a night, again, depending on the person. One cycle gives you both types of sleep that you need, non-REM sleep and REM sleep. The REM being rapid eye movement sleep, which is exactly what it sounds like. When you are in REM sleep, your eyes are rapidly moving beneath the eyelids. And when you are in non-REM sleep, they're not. It's a very crude way of differentiating them. There's actually a bunch of things that differentiate these two types of sleep. We'll touch on a few of them, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll do a little more high level. But if I can, it's a little difficult when you're in a virtual environment, but bear with me. If you can go to the part where it says fall asleep in the top left-hand corner, that's really where we start this chart. So when someone falls asleep, it's no surprise, they start falling asleep and they go into lighter stages of sleep. Those are our stage 1 and our stage 2 sleep. That's where we might be fluttering in and out a little bit. We kind of feel like we're having this maybe strange out-of-body experience a little bit. And given that we don't wake up from that, we'll keep dropping down into deeper stages of sleep. That's our stage 3 and our stage 4. So if you've ever heard of the term slow wave sleep, that's the stage, those are the stages that's happening in stage 3 and 4. And this is usually what I just tell people, honestly, is the good shit. This is what you want to make sure you get. This is where that restoration is happening for both your cognitive state. So all of the decision making, the assessing of risk, the building of appropriate treatment plans, anything in that realm, your memory, your executive functioning skills, they're all being restored during REM sleep, during non-REM sleep. Also, your physical state, right? So all the physical demands of the day, anything from just being on your feet all day long, helping patients, working out, anything that physically challenges your body. Non-REM sleep is also where you're going to be restoring that component of your performance. So moving along this chart, right, we go into those deep, deep stages of sleep. And then this is the part where I think some people don't necessarily know, is that in order for us to wake up, naturally, our body wants to start bringing us back through the stages in reverse. So that's why you see the chart coming back up, because we start to go from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. And that's because our body naturally would prefer that we wake up in a light stage of sleep. That way we don't get that groggy feeling, right? If you ever wake up in the morning, and I'm sure everyone's had this experience many times, right? Where you don't know your name, where you are, you're not totally sure you can actually physically walk out of bed and not fall. That we call it sleep inertia. So that real grogginess, it can come from a variety of reasons, but oftentimes it comes because someone's alarm is going off and waking them up in a very deep stage of sleep, which just isn't where their body and their brain naturally want to wake up. So it takes a little longer for the brain and the body to get in sync again. So that is why that can happen. But as we work our way up, you can see those little, I will call them rose-colored boxes that say REM in it. And that's because at the end of a sleep cycle, after we've gone all the way into deep sleep and we're coming back up, right before wakefulness is actually where we experience REM. And that's contrary to what most people think. I often see that most people think that REM is the deepest that we go. It is actually the lightest stage of sleep that we have. REM sleep is primarily used for restoring our emotional stability. So any of the emotional demands of the day, you're happy, you're sad, you're stressed, anxious, whether it's work, home, all of that emotional load that we experience, we need REM sleep to help kind of resolve all of that for us and restore us for the next day. So moving along through the chart, you go through these cycles throughout the night. You can see that each cycle looks a little different. The only thing I'd like to point out before we move on from this chart is you can also see that in the beginning of the night, hours 1, 2, 3, 4, you're seeing much bigger chunks of non-REM sleep, and you're seeing bigger chunks of REM sleep in the wee hours of the morning. And that's because our brain wants to restore our physical and our cognitive states first. And then when it's gone almost enough of that, the teeter-totter will go in the other direction, and it'll start restoring our REM sleep. So the reason why that's important is because if you're someone that's not getting enough sleep, if you're somebody that's getting up very, very early in the morning, like many of us do, and we wish we went to bed earlier, if you're cutting off critical hours of sleep in the early hours of the morning, most of what you're losing is REM sleep. So that's just, I think, important to know, because if you're someone that's getting poor sleep or not sleeping enough, and you feel or wish that you had an increased capacity to maybe be a little more patient, maybe a little less aggressive or assertive, or a little more even keeled, it could potentially be that you're missing some of that really critical REM sleep to help better prepare you for those emotional experiences. Okay, so we talked about what happens during the night when we sleep, right? But there's also another side to that equation, which is what happens when we're awake. And we don't talk about that enough, because sleep is this thing where we think about nighttime. And very rarely do we think about sleep during the daytime and what that means, but it's actually extremely important to think about this. The way we think about it is through something called the two-process model of sleep. Process S is the first part of that model, and process S is for sleep debt, hence the S. And the easiest way to understand it is, honestly, let's say you get up at 7 in the morning, for example. Your body, from the moment you wake up, or your brain, from the moment you wake up, believe it or not, is already thinking about when it gets to go back to sleep. I promise you. So what it does is, this graph, you see this line going up and up and up. What that line is doing is it is building its desire, your body's desire, to go back to sleep. So that desire is low in the morning, right? Because in theory, you've slept. But as the day goes on, your body's drive to go back to sleep just keeps getting higher and higher and higher until you go to bed. The other process in that model is process C. That is our wakefulness drive, but it's denoted C because really what it's getting at is something called our circadian rhythm. And I'm sure most, if not all, of the people in this room have at least heard of our circadian rhythm. That is our body's natural drive to be asleep or be awake. But truly what it's getting at is driving our alertness. And this is a process that is very hardwired in our body. So you can see here again at 7 a.m., in theory, somebody is getting up. What is happening there is their alertness is pretty okay, right? And then what's happening is throughout the day, their alertness gets a little lower and a little lower until it's time for them to go to sleep, and their alertness has really kind of, hit the floor. The most important part of this model is where these two processes overlap. So if you look at the beginning all the way to the left again, where we're looking at 7 a.m., there's our sleep drive up top, right? We wake up and our drive to go back to sleep just keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And then our wakefulness drive below it, we get more alert, right? It goes up as the day goes on. And as the day starts to wind down, our alertness gets less, or lower and lower, right? No surprise there. But about 11 p.m. or 2300, for argument's sake, say that's when we're getting ready for bed. That's because bedtime usually ends up being when the delta between those two processes is the greatest. When sleep drive hits its maximum and our alertness drive hits the floor, it's time to shut it down. The only way these two processes can realign themselves to start all over again the next day is by sleeping. But that's a very perfect scenario, right? What happens when we don't sleep? When we, work a 24, or we work a night, or, life gets in the way, right? So in this example where you see that blue box in the middle where someone's not sleeping, look what's happening to process S, right? Our sleep drive. It just keeps shooting through the roof, right? The drive gets higher and higher and higher. It builds all this additional pressure to go to bed. But our circadian rhythm continues to oscillate because it's so hardwired in our bodies. So then what happens, you look at that next night, when that person finally gets an opportunity to sleep, because of all the sleep pressure they built from that night of sleep loss, Now you can see the amount of time they need to sleep to realign those processes together again is much greater. Now it's, 11 hours of sleep that person needs to really get back to a baseline that's safe and functional. But it's kind of scary when you think about it, because how often do you miss a night of sleep? And then the next night you say, oh, well, great, I get to go sleep for 11 hours now to make it up. Surely work and life won't get in the way. It doesn't really work like that, right? But the science is the science, right? That's what you would truly need to mitigate the effects of what happened before. So it probably comes as no surprise. There's a long list of essential functions of sleep. What I kind of broadly just tell people when I get to this point in the presentation is that sleep truly is related to all aspects of our performance, and not loosely related, right? Very strongly related and independently related to how we function. So that's our emotions, our cognition, our cognitive state, our physical being, our overall health and well-being, and disease prevention all fall under essential functions of how we're sleeping. Now, of course, there are consequences, right, to when we're not sleeping well. It's great when we're sleeping well, and sleep's related to all things good, right? But poor sleep here's those all things bad, right? And just a couple that I wanted to highlight is, especially with the COVID age that we're living in, there is a rapidly growing body of literature that's showing the link between poor sleep and weakened immune systems. We have seen in COVID specific studies that individuals who were sleeping too little and poorly before, individuals who were diagnosed with COVID were on average sleeping less and had lower sleep quality than those that were, maybe experiencing some symptoms and then went in and didn't have a positive test. And we see that with the common cold. Sleep is absolutely linked to the common cold as well. And then going down the list here, we also see a very strong link between sleep and obesity. And I bring that up for this group because I think that's a really important thing to think about for, ourselves. And I think it's a very important thing to think about for the people that we care for as well. But this list here on the right, I wanted to highlight some of these specifically for this group, because these consequences specifically here have all been backed in science. They've been shown over and over in the literature. But as you kind of read through them, it's, I would argue, probably very easy to see how any one of these, pick your poison, how any one of these could absolutely impact the quality of care that you're able to provide. Okay. So we've talked about the foundations of sleep. We've talked about what things look like during the day for us, and we've talked about negative consequences of sleep. And I'm sure some of you have already asked this question to yourself. Well, okay, I get it, but how do I know if I'm actually getting good sleep aside from my, Garmin telling me I did a good job and clapping for me basically in the morning? Well, there's a couple, I like to be as objective as possible, right? So there's a few things you can start to think about here. And these may give you some metrics to either say, oh man, I'm really falling short of that. This might mean that I need to address this specific aspect of my sleep. Or it may tell you like, hey, I'm doing this part pretty well. But hopefully this can help you kind of self-assess your own sleep. So when we talk about good sleep, no surprise, right? We don't want it to take long for somebody to fall asleep. The rule of thumb I like to use is about 15 minutes, 30 if I'm being really generous. But it shouldn't take you longer than that to fall asleep. And if it does, that might be the area you say to yourself, like, hey, I'm dedicated to trying to make my sleep a little better. I need to learn how to fall asleep better. I need to train my body and my brain to fall asleep faster. I get a lot of soldiers that I work with who report sometimes taking upwards of 90 minutes, 2 hours to fall asleep. And that's when things get really scary, right? Because there's a lot that goes into somebody that's taking that long to fall asleep, but it can also be extremely challenging to fix that. We call that sleep latency, how long it takes you to fall asleep. You, of course, want few to no awakenings during the night. You want that ability to maintain your sleep, because insomnia can come in two forms. Insomnia can come in what we call initiation insomnia. That's when someone has trouble falling asleep, which is most commonly known. But if you're somebody that wakes up in the middle of the night or at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and you cannot fall back asleep, we call that maintenance insomnia. So it absolutely falls within the realm of someone that's experiencing symptoms of insomnia. You also want a short time to get out of bed. So when I talk about that, I mean, your alarm goes off in the morning and you're either a snooze monster or you're somebody, right, that might just hop out of bed really quickly. You definitely want to get out of bed quickly and not be a snooze monster, which self-disclosure, I am a snooze monster. But the reason for that is the more time you spend in bed rolling around or doing other things that isn't sleeping or actively trying to sleep, you teach your brain that bed is for all these different things. But if your brain learn and your body learns the cue of this auditory alarm or whatever gets you up in the morning, that goes off, I get out of bed. It's very, very good for your brain and your body to learn the regularity of a pattern. But when we snooze, right, sometimes it's, I don't know, one time, three times, four times, and then another 45 minutes goes by and it really breaks a pattern or it makes it difficult to truly build a pattern. We already talked about this next one, the two factors, right? I defined for you what we mean when we talk about sleep duration and what we talk about when we mean sleep quality. And sleep quality gets left out of the conversation a lot, but it's extremely important because if your Whoop tells you in the morning you slept 8 hours and you're like, good for me, I slept 8 hours. But I find out when I talk to you that you were actually lying in bed for 10 and a half hours. Your sleep quality is going to be honestly trash. And you're probably going to feel like garbage. So it's another side of the coin that has to absolutely be addressed. The number of hours we sleep is truly only half of the story. We've talked a little bit about regularity, but when we say regularity, as much as people hate me when I say this, it truly is true. We have to do the best that we can to make sure that on the weekends or the days off, that things just don't get so out of whack, so out of sync, because it could take your body and your brain days to really reorganize things. And then, that could be Monday and Tuesday of the work week. And then here you are at Wednesday, maybe sort of feeling good finally. And then Friday night rolls around again and things start to get, kind of wacky. You definitely want to do the best you can, of course, to keep a 7-day-a-week standard bedtime and wake time. I realize though how challenging that is for a lot of people. So I tell people who would like to try to do that, but maybe don't know if they could do both. If you prioritize anything, prioritize the time you get up in the morning. You can play around with your bedtime a little bit, but that does mean, yes, on off days or Saturdays or Sundays, you might be getting up at 06. And I know that sounds a little crazy. Some strategies will work for other people and some strategies won't work for some people. But if you're someone that's like, I could do that kind of regularity would probably be really beneficial for me, then maybe that's what you try to improve your sleep. And the reason I say if you have to prioritize one or the other to prioritize your wake time is because remember the two process model we talked about in the beginning? Those processes kick off when you wake up in the morning. So when you give your body and your brain that anchor, it's very, very helpful for it to learn patterns and keep up habits. So again, you could play around the bedtime a little bit if you got to, but I would suggest, if it's possible, wake up at the same time every single day. And then, of course, we want to feel rested and we want to feel restored. That's a no-brainer, right? So if sleep is essential, right? We've talked about this for about 20 minutes now. If sleep is essential, why don't we sleep more? Why don't we sleep better? And I won't go through this list. I'm sure you guys are reading it right now and you can say, a lot of you are probably saying, yep, that's me, or yep, I experienced that. And I think broadly what it is a few different themes, right? We have a culture, a very demanding culture in terms of society, work, just how we function day in and day out that really doesn't honestly do the best job of helping us be great sleepers. It just doesn't, right? We've got extremely early hours. We have kids that need to get on school buses at ungodly times that seem to just, I don't know, get earlier and earlier. It's crazy to me. And those things all prevent us sometimes from getting a lot of sleep. But then there's also, those are external factors, right? There truly are also individual factors as well. We have to take a strong look inward and say, am I really doing everything I can? Am I honestly maximizing my efficiency here to prioritize my sleep? And sometimes, I've been there personally too. Sometimes I have an honest conversation with myself where I just have to say, I'm not prioritizing this. I'm complaining a lot about external factors, but in reality, I'm not controlling everything that I can to try and get better sleep. And finally, there absolutely is a role of what we call your circadian preference and how it interacts with the external world. I look at that as, if you've heard of night owls, right, and morning larks. Typo on my slide, you'll have to excuse that. Morning larks, not lacks. But those who, society tends to favor much more those who are the morning larks, those who really enjoy getting up early, who function their best in the morning. But then individuals who are night owls, like myself, an extreme night owl, society is not very kind to us, right? Society doesn't care if you want to do your best work at 10:30, 11 at night, maybe go to bed at 1 or 2 and sleep till 10. That'll definitely get you fired from every job, right? So just some things to think about, external factors and internal factors. And then there's other things that happen, right? As well. What happens when we actually are prioritizing sleep? We do want to go to sleep. Well, do you ever have that situation or that experience where you're on firing on all cylinders all day long, go, 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 and then by the time you get into bed, it's like the first time of the day that you've had a moment to yourself, a moment of peace and quiet, but you can't fall asleep because now the whole day is coming at you. You're being flooded with all the things you didn't do at all the things you didn't do well, the anxiety that surrounds all of that. You might be the type of person that all of a sudden starts thinking about all the poor decisions you've ever made in your life and how it led you to this horrific point. But the brain gets flooded when it doesn't have enough time during the day to work through things. And that's really easy to understand then why that would impact greatly someone's ability to fall asleep. And we'll talk a little bit about that in strategies about how to create a barrier between the go, go, go of the workday and the parts of our personal life with winding down and being able to go to sleep. Like, what do we do in that interim period that will help make the sleep experience better? Okay. So we are at the end of part 1, and this is going to be our time for a few questions, if there are any.
Feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand.
And it's okay. It certainly is okay if there isn't right now. We'll have more time at the end for additional questions, but we did want to make sure at the end of this kind of scientific foundation piece of the presentation, we had an opportunity for questions.
Ashlee, I'm not seeing any pop up right now, so we can just keep on. Oh, okay. We have one from Mike. He said, Michael Hunt. He says, I can't stay for the whole presentation, but thank you for speaking tonight. Where can I find the recording? Sarah, maybe that would be something you could answer. And Sarah says
yes,
she will.
I'll ask, yeah. Mike, thank you for that question. The recording of our talk will be posted on the Fit for Practice website in the same place where you signed up for it. And it'll probably be posted in the next couple of days.
And then Ashlee, an interesting question from Gabriel. Is there a difference between males and females in lack of sleep patterns?
Yeah, very interesting. Oh, that is a really interesting question. Thank you for that. Not so I'm going to try and answer this question. When you say patterns, if you mean, are there differences between men and women in terms of the breakdown of their sleep stages, or in terms of maybe how much sleep they might need? There really isn't much of a difference at all in terms of a sleep need and breakdown. But as we move across the lifespan, when we get into certain stages of life, it can actually, sleep efficiency for women starts to decline much faster than men. And that often has to do with when women get into more of a menopausal phase of their life. And as they age as well, there becomes some additional considerations that make it a little harder for them to have really good quality sleep. But also as we age across the lifespan, men have some considerations as well that they have to think about. But there really isn't a difference in terms of gender or sex. Let me misspeak, in terms of sex, in terms of sleep need and that breakdown. Thank you for your question.
Great, thank you,
Okay.
Ashlee. There's one more question. I think it's from, I believe, Howard. Do you see a correlation between the amount of melatonin and serotonin with the sleep cycle? He said he might be getting his sleep chemicals wrong. I know you're going to get into that in a little bit here. Ashlee, do you want to take that now, or do you want to hold that question?
Yeah. So serotonin, not so much. We can do it now a little bit, and then we'll expand a bit in our other slide. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter, so it'll be outside of the scope of this conversation. And melatonin, being a sleep promoting hormone, is absolutely relevant here. But we actually don't need melatonin. Melatonin doesn't happen or get produced while we're sleeping, actually. It gets produced in low dim light, and it actually prepares us for bed. Sleep actually restores melatonin so it can start to rise again in the latter part of the day. So we'll definitely talk about that more, but melatonin absolutely plays a very critical role, and that role is governed mostly by light.
Awesome, Ashlee.
Oh.
So Lisa has one more, and then maybe, and then Howard also says, "Wow, thank you." Lisa has one. We'll take this last question, and then we'll keep on going and hold the rest to the end, I think. So Lisa asks, insightful considerations about how to fall asleep better. Thank you. When someone suffers from maintenance insomnia versus falling asleep insomnia, what suggestions are there to help return to sleep?
That is an absolutely great question. I will respectfully if we can put a pin in it, we have a slide that will talk specifically about that in this next part. And I think
like
it'll help answer it better. It is a little teaser. Okay,
right,
so we're going to move into our second part where we're going to talk about strategies. So the first strategy we're going to talk about is napping, and then napping plus napping plus caffeine. So one of the lessons, I hope, if there's one thing anyone takes away from this presentation, is we've thought about sleep for so many years as this nighttime thing, but it's really beneficial, especially in the provider community or anyone that is a shift worker, military, any group where the work demands are high and the sleep opportunities can get a little wacky. Sleep is actually a 24-hour construct or a 24-hour goal. And that's because we've learned so much about the power of short naps and what short naps can do for us. And there are two approaches to look at this at napping. The first one is probably the most common one, right? When you've gotten too little sleep, or you've had really crappy sleep all night, right? That's when you want to have those 20 to 30 minute naps during the day, or a 20 to 30 minute nap during the day. That 20 to 30 minute nap is going to give you enough of an alertness boost where it is going to help you perform. And that means it's going to help you do the good things well, and it's going to help you make less errors or have less poor quality in terms of your performance. What you want to make sure you do in this scenario is you want that nap, to the best of your ability, to be in the middle of your day. So when you take the time you wake up and you take the time you go to bed, when you do have control over it, you place that nap as much as you can in the middle of the day. And that's because usually by that point, that's where we've experienced an alertness dip, but it's also far enough away from bedtime that it's not going to prevent us or hinder us from falling asleep quickly. The second approach is when you haven't slept at all. We call that total sleep deprivation. You've been up all night, whether you've worked a shift and you've been up all night, you've been up all night caring for a young child or a sick spouse, or insert reason here. When you haven't slept at all, when the next time you get a sleep opportunity, what you want to do is get a full sleep cycle. So you want to take about a 90-minute nap. And that's because you've gotten nothing, right? So by giving you a full sleep cycle, you're going to get the non-REM sleep and you're going to get the REM sleep. And then that sleep cycle can help carry you through a little bit until that next much larger sleep opportunity, likely at night. There's also something, I'm sure some people in the room have heard of this, either called a caffeine nap, or some people like to call it a nappuccino. But it is a relatively recent body of literature that's looking at the summative effect of caffeine plus a nap. And really how that works is that it takes about 20 minutes for caffeine to get in your system and really start to do its job. So I don't know who was the first person to think of this, but someone decided, well, it takes 20 minutes for caffeine to work. If I take a 20-minute nap, right? I chug a cup of coffee, take a 20-minute nap, will I experience, incredible Hulk-like performance with the combination of these two magical strategies? I will tell you, the science is still kind of on the fence about it, but there are some people that have shown really positive effects. I know some people personally that swear by it. So, the way I look at it is your body's an experiment. And if you try this strategy and it works really well for you, that's awesome. If you try it and you're really not feeling it, or it's really not giving you the boost you hoped for, then that's okay too. There's a lot of other things you could be trying, but that is there. Oh, and one more point, I apologize about napping. The reason why it's more of a 24-hour goal is because, if someone's coming up to me and they're getting about 6 hours of sleep a night, and then during the day, they're getting about 2 30-minute naps, I am absolutely always going to count that as this person is getting 7 hours of sleep, because we have seen in the literature the way a nap, 6.5 hours of continuous sleep, and we've looked at that weighing against someone who got 6 hours of sleep and then another 30-minute nap somewhere. So in 24 hours, they got the same amount of sleep, just in different chunks. And we've seen similar performance outcomes for those two different groups. So you can definitely start thinking about your sleep in a 24-hour period. So everybody obviously always wants to know about caffeine, right? So we'll do some caffeine do's and don'ts here. And these are the things I think are the most important for somebody to take away. And the first is dosage and timing. In one dose of caffeine, you really, in terms of safety and performance, should not go over 200 milligrams. That is kind of scary because, pretty much every energy drink goes well above that. A venti Starbucks, a venti Dunkin' Donuts absolutely goes over that. Some of them even reach about 300 milligrams at this point. As far as timing, you want to space your caffeine out about 4 to 6 hours at a time. So it's, 200 milligrams of caffeine, and then about 4 to 6 hours later, depending on the person, if you still are in a period of performance, right? You're still at work, you're still doing something where you need to maintain your alertness, you could take another 200 milligrams. And you do that until about 6 hours before your next big sleep opportunity. And that's because of the half-life of caffeine. The half-life of caffeine is about 6 hours, right? So after 6 hours, you still have 50% of that caffeine in your system. And I often find that it is absolutely one of the biggest culprits that cause initiation insomnia in people. So you really want to think about dosage and timing. It's also very important to understand that caffeine is one of the strongest stimulant we absolutely have that we can take, but there is diminishing returns with caffeine with habitual use. And the problem with that is, in our culture, we absolutely use caffeine habitually, right? It's don't talk to me until I have my cup of coffee in the morning, right? And the way we move about our day is, right, cup of coffee, and we get this alertness boost and we ride it out. And then we start to feel a little dip. And then what do, right? More caffeine. We ride the high, we dip, and we just kind of ride this caffeine roller coaster all day long. But because we operate like that, we build this tolerance to caffeine. And we've shown in laboratory studies, actually in my previous lab, we did several projects that showed after about 3 days of habitual caffeine use, you see decrements in performance, and you see the person already needing more caffeine just to maintain. So that can get really scary, right? When you're just taking more and more and more to get the same effect. It's not a popular conversation to have with people, right? But it's real, and it's scientifically backed. So it's important that we talk about it. So truthfully, the best use of caffeine is strategic use, where if you don't really need it, you don't take it. And if you know you're experiencing a period of where high performance is needed, you use it as an alertness agent. And then finally, taking caution with your caffeine sources. In all honesty, I don't know if this comment will be as relevant to you guys as it is to the military groups that I work with. But I work with soldiers that, they'll take every energy drink possible. They come in these giant cans and they're just drinking them so fast and so often that we don't truly know, right? We haven't had these energy drinks around long enough to truly know the long-term impact of them. They've got 50,000 ingredients in them. And no matter what science tells you at this point, there's probably way more we don't know about the bad that's in them than the things we do know. So just consider that. I would tell you to be a cautious consumer and consider that when you're picking your source of caffeine. Something like pure black coffee, it's kind of a dumb moment, right? Something like black coffee, certainly you know exactly what's in that compared to a Reign or a Bang. And this you'll probably laugh at, but every time I do a presentation, I try to Google something very specific in my presentation. So this time I said, what would happen if I Googled people and energy drinks? And I laughed for a pretty long time looking at these photos because I don't know what any of them are for. But you've got these people in groups enjoying their drinks. You've got this woman just staring at a blank can. And then this guy up top, I don't know why he's pouring them out. Maybe he feels the same about the ingredients that are in them. But I thought it was pretty funny to see these random photos of people on Google with energy drinks. So usually it gives me a little laugh when I'm trying to make my presentations. So now we're going to talk a little bit about light. And in all honesty, I could do probably 3 hours just talking about light because it's so important to the discussion on sleep and your circadian rhythm. And I really don't know why we don't talk about it enough, but we certainly don't. So I mentioned this a little bit before, but our circadian rhythm, our hardwired drive to be asleep and awake, is primarily governed by light. And in the hierarchy of light, it is primarily governed by bright sunlight. And then when you move down next into artificial light sources, then we're looking at the bright white and the blue lights. Those are absolutely the most alerting lights to us. Now, years and years and years ago, before the invention of the light bulb, think about how people operated, right? The sun came up, and that's when they got up and started their day. And then when dusk came, the sun started to go down. That's when everybody got inside and started winding down for the day, right? Our circadian rhythms were pretty well entrained to the natural course of sunlight outside. But then comes the invention of the light bulb, right? And now, thankfully for the light bulb, we've gotten so much from that, obviously. But on the flip side, all of that exposure we get now to artificial light when it's dark outside, but we're using light inside, really screws with our circadian rhythm. Because the way our rhythm works is it's still very, we haven't evolved as much as we think. When it is dark outside, our brain and our body want to start winding down. And when we have artificial light that's alerting us all the time, it's really kind of tricking our brain and body to thinking it's still go, go, go time, but it's not, right? It's time to wind down for the day. So there are some strategies that you can think about. And the reason why I provide these strategies, let me see here. I think I have a slide. Yeah, I'm going to actually go to this slide and then we're going to back up for a second. I want to show you this slide because it shows you the natural course of melatonin throughout a day. So melatonin, as I mentioned before, is a sleep promoting hormone. That means that it prepares you for bed. It does not work like Ambien, which is a common misconception. It does not work like Ambien, which is a sleep-inducing drug, right? Ambien is meant to make you go to sleep. Melatonin takes a long time to work. It takes a long time to start to do its kind of job. But the way it's supposed to work is that during the day, right? This chart starts on the x-axis at noon, let's say. Melatonin is low during the day when there's bright light outside. And that's because we don't need melatonin, right? We're not trying to go to bed, so we don't need melatonin. But when it starts to get dusk, let's use this example about 8 p.m. or 2000, it starts to get dusk and melatonin starts to naturally start to rise for us, given that there's no artificial light suppressing it. But if dust starts to come and there's no artificial light sources getting in the way, melatonin will take several hours, but it'll naturally rise until you are extremely sleepy and it's time to go to bed. And then that sleep helps restore melatonin bring it down to the floor the next morning, because when we wake, right, we won't need melatonin again. Now going back to our previous slide, to some light regulation strategies, because let's see, right? I'm telling you that you don't want light exposure in the evening when you're starting to wind down after dinner before bed. But gosh, what do you do about that, right? You can't just turn all your lights off in your house and walk around, I don't know, by candlelight. That would be extremely weird and probably would truly piss your family members off a lot. But there's a few light strategies that you can consider that are what I call kind of the middle of the road, right? You need light, but how do we help make light less alerting so melatonin can still start to rise and do its job? And all of these strategies revolve around the spectrum color of light. So what you want to consider, if this is a strategy that you think will work well for you, they have so many color changing bulbs now that are automatic that you can control with an app. They get cheaper and cheaper every day on Amazon. But consider in the main places of your home, replacing those bright white light sources with bulbs that can turn orange or reds. And that's because the orange and red side of the light spectrum is much less alerting than the bright white side of the spectrum. You can set those to turn on with dusk or after dinner. So that way you and your family can still move around your home and do what you need to do, but you're not getting such a strong amount of light exposure that you're suppressing melatonin and potentially not able to sleep. So we do that in our home, down in our main living spaces at night. We also we put night lights on the pathway to the bathroom and then in the bathroom itself with reds and oranges bulbs in them. That way, in the middle of the night, if you get up, you're not throwing on that super bright light in the bathroom and starting to make your brain think it's time to go again. When you're like, absolutely not, it's time to pee and go back to sleep. But that short burst of light actually starts getting your brain going, and we don't want that. So replacing those lights around your home can absolutely make a huge difference. And then the other strategy I'll tell you guys is and I'm sure a bunch of you have it already, but it is very helpful. Take your phones, take your tablets, and absolutely use those light filtering settings on them that are doing pretty much the same thing. Dusk rolls around, and then all of a sudden your tablet and your phone go from those beautiful bright pictures to those kind of tinted, browny, orangey looking pictures that don't look so nice. Yes, they don't look so nice, but that's what's happening. The bright white light's getting filtered out and some of the orange is getting pushed out to you to, again, try and be a little less alerting. So now we're going to move into some lifestyle considerations. I know we only have a couple minutes, so I am going to speed through this a little bit. So in terms of a pre-sleep routine, there's science that absolutely shows that your brain loves to see the same thing happening every single day in the same way, right? Now, you can have a routine where before bed, if you do the same few things over and over and over before bed, your body and your brain learn that very quickly, and it helps the brain and body relax and have a buffer between go, firing all cylinders all day long, and oh my God, now I'm in bed and I don't feel relaxed at all, right? Whether that's taking your dogs on a walk, doing some meditation, having a cup of tea. There's a routine. I really believe that everybody can have their own unique routine. And if you don't have something like that right now, consider what that may be able to do to help break apart those two parts of your day. I'm going to skip over this because we've talked about these different barriers mostly in the rest of the presentation. And sleeping environment. So we talked a lot about training your brain and your body, right? You really want your bed to be reserved for two things. You want your bed to be reserved for sleeping and sex, and truthfully, nothing else. And what that means is that if you're having trouble falling asleep or you're waking up in the middle of the night and you cannot fall back asleep, truthfully, the best strategy is to get yourself out of bed, Go somewhere and do something quiet and relaxing somewhere else until your eyelids start to get tired again, and then get yourself back into bed. Let another 5 minutes go by. If you are not asleep by then, you got to get out of bed and do the same thing, because you're training your body and your brain that if I'm in this bed, I'm going to sleep. And it's a very powerful cue and association. I will tell you that it can take a couple of weeks to really, get this right. But I see a lot of success from those I work with who are having those initiation or maintenance insomnia issues. Further, when you're thinking of your sleep environment, consider the breathability of your mattress, your pillows, your blankets, your sheets, all of that. They trap so much heat in them that alone can actually prevent people from sleeping really well. Also, don't shortchange the impact that very small sources of light have in your bedroom. So I've told you about the power of light, right? But I am telling you, those cracks of light that come through your curtains, the light on your TV or an alarm clock or a dehumidifier, cover all of those up, turn them around, because your brain is picking up on those sources of light through the eyelids, even while you're sleeping. And then, of course, managing noise and considering bed companions. So I think we have about another minute here. I will very quickly talk about supplements. My bottom line up front here, guys, about supplements is that there's a million of them out there, but you have to be cautious consumers, because when you buy these things in the store, the FDA regulations on all of them in this country, just based on the laws, the FDA regulations are very poor. So it'll tell you you're getting one thing on the box, but in reality, there may be a very, very minimal amount of what you actually think you're getting in there. So if a natural sleep aid is working for you, that's wonderful. But if you go and try something and you say, oh my God, this didn't work, my sleep's never going to get fixed, consider something behaviorally based for a change. That will be much more meaningful, more likely than trying a natural sleep aid you find in the store that you have very little knowledge of, truthfully, and control over. And then my last point will be related to technology. And again, the bottom line up front is going to be, you can read the list here, but whether it's a wearable or it's something in your bed like a weighted blanket, a magic cooling pillow, whatever device is out there, right? Because there's so many of them, none of them are scientifically proven to fix your sleep. There's no study that has shown that yet. So kind of like the supplements, if you use any of these technologies and you truly feel that it is part of your routine and you enjoy them, absolutely keep using them. Absolutely. But if you're looking for a way to help improve your sleep, you do not need to go spend all of this money to buy these fancy technologies to fix your sleep. There are strategies, there are things you can do that are much cheaper, that are actually free. Instead of spending $700 on a fancy Garmin watch, right? They're cool to have, and that's how they market themselves. But there is truly no scientific evidence that says they're going to have a meaningful impact on your sleep. There's a few resources here for you guys. So I know the presentation is going to be posted. So if you want to look at these at your own time, most of them are specifically related to providers. So I hope that they are useful for you. And then I apologize for using up all of our time here, but that is the end of my presentation. I don't know if we have a few extra minutes for questions. I would be certainly willing to take them if that is possible, but thank you all very much for your time and your participation.
Thanks so much, Ashlee. Sarah, may we take a couple questions?
Yes, thanks so much, Ashlee. And yes, we have all the time that you have available.
Perfect.
So
Awesome.
Let's go for it.
So Jacqueline asked the question a little bit earlier that I'm just going to go ahead and ask. She was wondering if you have any tips or resources to maximize sleep quality for older adults, 70 plus, or understanding these norms for the more geriatric population would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't get too many questions usually about the geriatric groups. So across the lifespan, geriatric groups still need to get about 7 to 9 hours of sleep. That does stay the same. But what makes it really challenging, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, is the sleep quality part of that. And individuals who are in the geriatric stage of their lives, they tend to, right? I'm going to make some generalizations here. They tend to be on medications that often have side effects that negatively impact sleep. There are much higher rates of insomnia in those populations. So the challenges become greater, but the strategies don't necessarily change just because of the age group. The one thing that I find most advantageous for that age group, because of the high prevalence of insomnia, is the strengthening of the cue association between bed and going to sleep. So if an older individual is in bed and they are tossing and turning all over the place, it's the strategy of, getting them out of bed, sitting them in a chair. Maybe they're in very dim light and they're reading a few pages of a book until their eyes get droopy again. And then they get in bed and they try again. Oftentimes, right, I find the opposite is true. Older individuals, they toss and they turn for hours and hours and hours. They also have some circadian rhythm challenges that make them go to bed usually very early, sometimes too early. So sometimes we shift their bedtime a little later, so they're not tossing and turning so much and they're more tired. And then they also get up really early a lot of the time, just because that's been what they've been used to their whole lives. So sometimes just going to bed a little later, it makes them more tired, and then they don't experience the insomnia as much. So the cue association, absolutely. And then also understanding what any of their medications might be doing to their sleep.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashlee. David asked us, what sleeping scales like Stanford, Epworth, et cetera, would you recommend we use as PTs?
Oh, yeah, you are knowledgeable. Thank you for the question. Yeah, as PT, so there are a few. I always like to recommend ones that are obviously, they're validated, they're widely used, and they're quick, right? And they're easy. So if you want to, the gold standard for looking at sleep quality is something called it's called the PSQI, the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. That tool was developed at the University of Pittsburgh. It's the most widely cited sleep validation article in the world. And it is a very quick tool that you can give to somebody every month to assess their sleep quality. It does a really beautiful job of assessing overall sleep quality. And then it has 8 different subcomponents that will evaluate different things, like, is it their temperature that's affecting them? Is it a medication? Is it a lifestyle characteristic? So that's a really quick and easy way to get some rich information about someone's sleep quality. If you're focusing more on someone's daytime fatigue, if someone's major struggle is how just tired they feel during the day, a very quick tool is the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. And that is just an 8-item tool that asks somebody on a Likert scale, how likely are they to fall asleep doing certain very common tasks. It's extremely simple, but it is absolutely the hallmark scale that we use for broad daytime fatigue. And then, yes, you did mention the Stanford Sleepiness Scale. There's also another one called the Karolinska Sleepiness Scale, the SSS and the KSS. And those two are more momentary fatigue. Those two scales are extremely quick. They're singular items, and they're meant to determine how tired somebody is in that very moment. So they're extremely sensitive to performance decrements, sleep loss. So those would be the kind of the brief, short arsenal of tools I would start looking at first as a clinician.
Awesome. Catherine asks a question that I bet you know a lot about, because that this is something that happens in the military also. What about the use of energy lights during the day if you're in an office without natural sunlight?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah. I got to be honest, I wish I got this question more from the military. I'm going to assume you're referring to things like light boxes. Absolutely. When you are not getting, ideally we want natural sunlight, right? But a lot of us work in places or work schedules where we get up and it's dark, and we work in a building with no windows. Like, if you work in a sleep lab, you don't have windows ever. And then sometimes you come home and you don't even see the sunlight because it's dark then too. Light boxes are absolutely helpful. They're getting cheaper and cheaper. You can buy those as well out there. Philips makes a few great ones. And absolutely, the way you want to use them is you want to get bright light from those boxes as quickly as you can in the morning. So oftentimes I tell people, if you sit down and you have breakfast in the morning, sit in front of it. It's a little more, it can get a little more nuanced than that, but for a kind of a beginner in understanding this, just sit in front of it while you're eating. And then you could do the same thing at lunch, right? If it's the kind of rule of thumb is, if it's light outside and you don't get to see it, it is absolutely beneficial to expose yourself to some artificial light sources in a way that's more direct. And then of course I would avoid doing that. Let's say if you're working and it's around dusk time, I would avoid using the light boxes then because it's just too close to bedtime. You don't want to alert yourself more than you need to.
Awesome. Actually, a couple more. So Howard asks,
Sure.
You mentioned that cognitive function is mostly restored during the non-REM and emotional regulation during the REM. But what about the physical restoration and recovery? And I would add to that probably, what about like cardiovascular recovery and things like that?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I apologize. I think I did breeze past that a little too quickly in the beginning, but your physical restoration. So any demand on your body physically, your muscles, your joints, your tendons, all of that gets restored during non-REM sleep as well. And the science believes that that's part of the reason why we front load restoring non-REM sleep in the beginning of the night is because it's kind of got this dual role, right? It has to restore two of the three massive areas of performance, our cognition and our physical state. So that absolutely would include any strain on your cardiovascular system, metabolic system, any of that.
Fantastic. So a melatonin question. I knew that, and by the way, Howard says, thank you. Tanya
You're very welcome.
says, Tanya says, can the prolonged use of melatonin be harmful, or does it reduce the body's natural production of melatonin? And what is the recommended dosage and timing if you choose to take melatonin?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I wish I had a little more time to dig into that as well. So I get this question. It's funny, I used to not get this question a lot. I get it more and more lately, though, in my talks, which I'm very grateful for. I'll answer kind of the middle part of your question first. There's no evidence right now that tells us that habitual use of melatonin will either be harmful for you directly because of the use of melatonin, or that the use of melatonin will actually hinder your body's natural production of it. Haven't seen any evidence of that yet. As far as dosing, this can be a little tricky. It can be anywhere from 1 to 5 milligrams. And the reason for that is just pure individual differences. And also, there's a lot that goes into determining, is someone taking melatonin to help just regulate their circadian rhythm? Or are they taking melatonin because they have a shift work related sleep disorder? And that's a very big question to answer. So I love educating people on melatonin, but melatonin is actually very complicated. And oftentimes I refer people to working with sleep physicians, because if I think someone's a shift worker and they're experiencing an actual clinical disorder, it's not necessarily as simple as just giving them melatonin. But I'm just trying to kind of paint the picture of, it's pretty nuanced. So it's a little hard to pin down exactly how much you might take. If you're someone that's trying to use it to get yourself a little sleepier, prepare for bed, you're not falling in that clinical disorder range, at least that you know of, I usually tell people 3 milligrams is a good place to start. But again, right, being a cautious consumer of when you're buying melatonin gummies, melatonin pills in the store, there's been several huge laboratory studies that have gone in a grocery store and bought all of the melatonin products and then broken them down in the lab and really evaluated how much pure melatonin is in this gummy or this pill. And they find out time and time again that it's often nowhere near as much as they say it is. And the variety between products and the inner product variety between like one gummy in a bottle and another gummy in a bottle can drastically differ as well. So it's not that I'm not a fan of melatonin. I absolutely am. It just needs to be informed use. All of that being said, though, your body naturally, when it's firing on all cylinders, your body produces all the melatonin it needs. And it sounds a little corny, but it's usually just a matter of kind of understanding how it functions and just kind of like harnessing the function of melatonin more and letting it do its job. We do so much during the day that suppresses our melatonin from rising, that behavioral change is way more powerful most of the time than supplementing with melatonin.
Ashlee, that's awesome. Tanya, you asked a follow-up question about regulating the circadian rhythm and staying asleep. I'm assuming that meant through the use of melatonin. Is that right? Or
Yes, that is what I was asking.
okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I think I misunderstood the question then. So you're asking about regulating your circadian rhythm with the use of melatonin while sleeping or when waking up in the middle of the night? I'm so sorry. If you could please clarify.
Yeah, I apologize. You were saying that the answer to the question was difficult based on whether or not you were trying to regulate your circadian rhythm or if you were a shift worker. And I was speaking specifically for regulating circadian rhythm or to stay asleep during the night.
Got it. Got it. Yes. Okay. So yeah, if you're a shift, so we'll keep kind of putting aside, yes, if you're not necessarily a shift worker, but somebody that has shift work disorder, which is a diagnosable condition. But yeah, if you're trying what I kind of said about when you take it to kind of help your body feel more sleepy before you go to sleep at night, it can absolutely help regulate your rhythm so you can fall asleep a little more soundly. But melatonin is not typically prescribed or recommended for individuals that might wake up in the middle of the night, and that's because it takes too long to work. But if melatonin is actually doing its job and you take it before bed, it can absolutely have positive impact on decreasing the amount of time you wake up in the middle of the night or how long you're up in the middle of the night for.
Fantastic. She says, love harnessing the effects of natural production. That's a good way to put it, Tanya.
It really is. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. The last question that I see is from Sarah. Do you ever recommend meditation to help fall asleep? I think that was on your slide, but maybe if you have any
Yeah.
specific recommendations.
I absolutely do recommend meditation. There is science that backs up. There's so many positive effects of meditation. But actually, one of the companies I work for, we pair our sleep presentations when we do workshops with our meditation and yoga sessions because of the kind of summative effect that can be there between understanding how to behaviorally change your sleep and incorporating things like meditation. In terms of how I would use it, I would definitely say if you're somebody interested in melatonin or melatonin meditation, think about how you can build it in to a pre-sleep routine. And meditation absolutely does not need to be kind of this all or nothing thing you engage in or strategy you engage in where you have to do it for an hour or half an hour. There are tons of apps out there that provide really great meditation segments that can go anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour. One of the best ones I think that's out there right now, a lot of our soldiers use it. It's getting more and more popular. People love it. I've used it, is an app called Calm. Now you do have to pay for these things. So I'm sure there's something out there that might be free, but the app Calm has all kinds of meditation and mindfulness protocols. It has all kinds of tools in it to help you not just fall asleep better, but to reduce maybe the anxiety that kind of comes with trying to break away from your day and moving into a restful place. So I don't work for Calm. I'm a little nervous about, endorsing it like this, but just from a personal standpoint, it's one of several options that are out there. And I think there is great power behind thinking about meditation or mindfulness as a pre-bedtime routine. Absolutely.
Awesome. And you actually had someone say that they liked Calm right before you said Calm. So that's
Oh,
pretty
funny.
cool. Yeah. I think we'll take this last question from Angelina, and then I think we'll probably say our goodbyes after that. Angelina asked, how is it better to deal with early morning wake ups around 4 a.m. and the inability to fall asleep again? How do you best deal with that wake up before you actually want to wake up, I think is what she's asking.
Yeah, so there's two things that are important to think about here. The first thing is, if I'm working with someone and that's the thing that they're struggling with, the first thing I'm probably going to figure out is, when are they going to bed, right? I'm going to figure out, what time are you going to bed? And I'm going to figure out, let's just say for argument's sake, they go to bed at 10, they go to bed at 10 and they're waking up at 4 and they cannot go back to sleep. If I'm looking at something like that, I'm trying to figure out how much time they might be spending trying to fall asleep, or how much time they may be waking up before that 4 a.m. stint. Because oftentimes what happens is there's a lot of wakefulness going on. And if that's happening, we can try and condense the sleep window to get rid of some of that wakefulness. And once we've got someone sleeping a little more soundly and they're not experiencing all the wake ups before the 4 a.m., we can then start to slowly push the bedtime or the wake time away from each other and elongate the sleep period. That does honestly take a little more, a longer discussion, but managing the wakefulness that happens before the 4 a.m. wake up, or how long it might take to fall asleep, often proves to be really beneficial. But in the more immediate, I absolutely think the cue strengthening between bed and sleep is critical for people that wake up the 3s, the 4 a.m.s, they can't fall back asleep. Because what happens? You lie in bed because it's a crazy hour of the day, right? What are you going to possibly get up and do? So people just kind of like lie in bed and they toss and they turn. And that decreases the strength, right? It minimizes or weakens the association between bed and sleep. It teaches the body, bed's for kind of rolling around. Lots of people turn to their phones during those times and they're just like, I'm going to scroll through Instagram until I'm tired. And that does tons of damage because of all the light that you're getting. So I would absolutely consider using the strategy of, as painful as it can be when you get started, to remove yourself from bed. If you can't fall asleep again at 4 a.m., try and tire yourself out through some meditation or, reading a book, a couple pages of a book. Get back in bed, try it again, and then just keep repeating that process. And like I said earlier, you may have to do it for a little bit of time so your body can relearn the cue. But it ends up, I don't want to say, always working, but it proves to be a really good place to start in terms of its success rate.
Awesome. Ashlee, thank you so much. Sarah, I'm going to let you answer Gabriel's question on the access to the PowerPoint presentation. But I just want to just say thanks so much again to Ashlee for taking the time to make this presentation and then spending the time just kind of bestowing your knowledge on us tonight. I know that I have learned a lot from you, and I hope that everybody else here has as well. And just thanks for helping us out as clinicians, and thanks for what you do every day.
Oh, I'm happy to do so. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I had a really great time, and I hope that everybody was able to take something from this. That's my job, right? To try and educate and give you some skills. So I wish you all the best of luck, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much, Ashlee, and thank you so much, Darren. Awesome.